Hi, I'm James and thanks for tuning in to Ebuyer. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Neutron Lab Stellar gaming PC case. Neutron Lab is one of the latest brands in the PC hardware space, specialising in case and peripheral products with high quality components and great out-of-the-box performance. I'm hoping that the Stellar is no exception to that rule, but there's only one way really to find out. In this video, we're not only going to unbox the case and cover off the key features, but we're going to build a complete gaming PC in it. I'll be walking through the build process with parts, all of which are available from Ebuyer, and we'll link these in the description of today's YouTube video. For now though, let's unbox the Neutron Lab Stellar and see what we're working with. With the case out of the box, what I typically do at this stage is take off the side panels so we can check out the internals, and then power up the 4 included RGB fans that you get with the Stellar. But this video is a little bit different. Let's build the system up and wait till the end for a big reveal of just how good it looks when it's all powered up. Fans, graphics cards, CPU coolers, absolutely everything. In order to do that, we appear to be missing some PC components. So just like magic, and just like that, we have components. Now, I've gone ahead and picked a good array of components for this Neutron Lab system. I've gone ahead and picked up an MSI RTX 3060, which I'll be pairing with an AMD Ryzen 5 3600. 16GB of Crucial's Ballistics gaming memory gives us plenty of fast RAM, while a Corsair MP510 is the SSD choice for this system. Once again, all of these components can be purchased at ebuyer.com, and we'll leave a parts list in the description down below. Now, first things first, we're going to install some components into the motherboard. Once we've built our motherboard up just a little bit more, we can then move this into the case itself. The CPU is the first of those components that we're going to install. You'll want to look out and find a little gold triangle. This is often on the bottom left of the chip and should be aligned with the top left-hand side of our CPU socket. We're going to lift up the retention arm on the socket itself and very carefully drop the chip into place. It really is super simple, and our Ryzen CPU is now installed. Next up then is memory. Now, this gaming kit from Crucial is going to work really well, and the red heat spreader looks awesome. I think maybe that's a cue to set the fans in this system to red to really create a colour scheme that looks cohesive and ties in nicely together. We're going to use the grey RAM DIMM slots on the motherboard, as this will give us that dual channel performance edge. And you can do this super simply by just pulling back the retention clips. We can then go ahead and slide the memory into place, but watch out because it is notched and will only go in one way around. Once you're confident it's the right way, you can apply a bit of pressure and the memory will click into place. You're going to do the same and repeat for as many RAM DIMMs as you've got. So in our case, we've got 2, with a further 2 slots available and free. These are going to be great for future upgrades and add in a bit more memory, 32 gigs specifically, without taking out any of the original Ballistics gaming kit. The next component we're going to pop in is actually the M.2 storage. We could do the CPU cooler, but it might make the M.2 slot a bit harder to access. So for now, let's focus on the SSD drive. The MP510 from Corsair will give you super fast boot up speeds, and comes in a package that's actually fairly affordable considering the feature set you actually get. You will need though a slightly smaller screwdriver for this step. Specifically a teeny tiny screwdriver is what we'd call it over on the Geekawatt channel, which will allow you to install the M.2 SSD nicely into place. We're going to use this to remove the retention screw that comes pre-installed, and that paves the way for the actual SSD to slide in. It's going to drop in nice and easily and be secured down with the same screw that we literally just removed 10 seconds ago. And once we've done that, the CPU, the RAM and the M.2 SSD are all installed. It really is that simple. Now the CPU cooler is next up, and often with a Ryzen processor, you will get a stock cooler that has pre-applied thermal paste. In our instance though, we've used this cooler before, so need to apply a fresh dab of thermal paste. This Antec thermal paste will work well, though other manufacturers and options are available, as I say, at ebuyer.com. You don't want to apply too much thermal paste, that is more than enough. In fact, I'd argue that's perhaps a little too much, but it will be fine for this system. Installing any cooler is always the most complicated stage of any build. Thankfully, this AMD stock cooler is a bit more simple though. Look out for these metal tabs with the cutouts on, and you can then use these to actually secure the cooler into place. These will slot over the black plastic retention clips that come pre-installed on your motherboard. And hopefully you can see just how these fasten and hook down into place. With the one at the bottom done, we're going to spin the motherboard round and do the one at the top. Nice and easily, like so. And we pull back the fastener, push it down, and the cooler's in. We know this because we can pick the whole motherboard up by the cooler with no issues. I'm not suggesting that this is best practice, but it does show that the cooler is easily installed. You'll then have a couple of cables just to wire up, which include an RGB header and a fan header, and they go to these two ports at the top of the motherboard. Fan on the bottom, RGB on the top. You might notice that the cables are looking a little bit messy, and that's because, well, they are. And this is where the included accessory bag that you'll find with your Neutron Lab case comes in. Not only does it feature the screws needed to install the motherboard into the case and the power supply and such like, but it also gives you some cable ties, which we can use to actually tidy these cables up and give a more permanent solution as far as aesthetics is concerned. So let's do that, get these tidied up, and then we can move on and put the motherboard assembly over into the case. And with that, everything is looking a little bit better. I think those cables definitely look tidier, and you can spend more time, if you like, really tucking these out the way to make them hidden and unseen. The motherboard assembly though, as I say, is all done. And that allows us to move it into the case today. And that's where, of course, our Neutron Lab chassis comes into play. As far as installing motherboards into cases, it's always the best shout to take off as many side panels as you can. That makes the case easier to access and gives a bit more clearance for the next stage of the process. This gives me a great chance to point out an awesome feature on the Stellar case. You can see here that the middle standoff is actually slightly raised, and what this will do is hold the board into place to allow you to screw it and secure it down. That means once the board's in the case, it's not going to fall out. You do of course still need to screw it in properly, but it does bide you a little bit of time and makes things that little bit easier. There is one thing though you really need to remember to do before you put the motherboard into the Neutron Lab chassis, and this is going to be the same with a lot of motherboards out there. That's to install the rear I/O shield. On some motherboards, you actually get this built into the design, but for us today, it's separate. And it slots in just at the back of the case here. It's what turns a regular cutout into all the different I/O cutouts, the input-output ports for your system. It can be just a little bit fiddly, but it will click in corner by corner, a little something like this. Once you've done that, you're able to then go ahead and slide the motherboard in, with those rear I/O ports slotting through the I/O shield. A little something like this. Here we go. Remember that raised center standoff I talked about earlier? That's the only reason the board is static and not falling down, and it gives you a great chance to secure it into place. You want to go ahead and use these screws, which are what you'll find included in the chassis box, to actually secure the board into place. Tighten up each of the standoffs nice and carefully, and once we've done that, the motherboard, well, it's in, isn't it? That moves us on nicely to the next component and the penultimate part of today's Neutron Lab system build, and that is of course the graphics card. This is an RTX 3060, one of the most powerful GPUs on the market right now, that sits as an entry-level card into the new 30 series lineup. While it might not pack as much punch as a 3080 at 4K, it's still superb for 1080 and 1440p gaming in the biggest titles out there. We're talking Cyberpunk 2077, Valorant, Apex Legends, you name it, this card has got it covered. What we need to do is we need to figure out which of the rear PCIe slots need removing. Much like the I/O shield, these form as kind of a placeholder, which will be removed once the graphics card's in. Now, just to get you guys a good angle on this, the graphics card is going to slot in to the PCIe 3.0 slot, which is just below the SSD. We're going to pull back the clip and then shadow the graphics card over the slot. This allows us to figure out which of the rear PCIe covers need removing. And we've figured out from this that it's slots 2 and 3. The one at the top is going to stay put for the time being. When removing these covers, make sure to keep hold of the screw that gets released, as we'll be using these to fasten the graphics card into place and make sure it doesn't go anywhere. So here we have the first slot of the two needing to be removed, and we're going to repeat for the second slot as well. Occasionally on a very high-end GPU, you might actually have a 3-slot design, and similarly, if you've got lots of graphics cards or expansion cards in a system, you'll want to leverage even more of the slots available. It's then a really simple case of just sliding that graphics card in, pop it into the slot, and we're pretty much good to go. Use those screws we removed just a second ago to secure the card into place. This will keep it nice and secure, not only for day-to-day use, but if you wanted to transit the PC around, just keeps everything nice and firm, nice and stable, and takes all the risk out of the process. And once we've done that, we've only got one component left to do. We've covered off the CPU, the GPU, the memory, the SSD, the motherboard, and of course, the case. But we now need to give our whole system power. And that's not a simple job as just taking a cable from the wall and plugging it into the back of the case. That's where something like this comes in, a power supply, otherwise known as a PSU. What this will do is take the power from the wall in the form of a kettle lead, which comes included with the power supply, and separates it out into lots of different power connectors that each of our components can understand, let's put it that way. In order to install the power supply, you want to spin the case around to the rear. It's going to slide into the back, just like so, and given the ventilation and clearance under our case, we can go for a fan down orientation. What this means is that the power supply is going to pull air in from under the case and exhaust out the back of the unit. Given the ventilation on the power supply shield, a fan up orientation will also work in this system in the Neutron Lab chassis. In a here's one I prepared earlier moment, I've gone ahead and pre-ran some of the cables we'll need to power the system up. Let's run through these one by one. The first is a 6+2 pin, so that has 6 and 2. It's a GPU power connector, and that will power up the graphics card. You sometimes get extra ones as well, as heftier GPUs require more power. But for us today, it's a singular 8-pin, so it's just going to slot into place really nicely. It literally is as simple as that. The motherboard power connector is next, and it's the largest of all the power cables by a mile. It's got 24 pins, or often 20 plus 4. So if you want to count them out separately, you can do so, and it's 2 pins wide, so 2 blocks across, and this goes to the right-hand side of the motherboard. That brings us finally on to the CPU power connector. That's this one here, and it's 4+4 pins. So these will actually separate out into 2, just to show you there, giving you 4, 4, or 8 pins of power. And this goes to the top left of the motherboard. You can see it just to the left of the silver heatsink on the Asus board in this system. As a general rule of thumb, the GPU power cable is always on the GPU. The motherboard power cable is on the right-hand side of the motherboard 99 times in 100, while the CPU power connector is in the top left of the board, once again 99 times out of 100. But there are exceptions to the rule on very rare occasions, so just keep your eye out for that one. We are nearly done. There is just one more step left before the build is, shall we say, complete. And that's to plug up the front panel connections. These fruity cables are the step where most people can get quite stumped, but let me break them down one by one. USB 3 is the easiest, so let's do that first. It's a blue connector that is notched and powers the USB 3.0 ports on the top of the case. HD audio is next. This will be labelled, so good to see Neutron Lab following the industry standard here, and it is pinned out. One pin is missing, which will mean it only connects to the bottom left side of the motherboard. USB 2 is next, and visually this looks nearly identical to HD audio, but it's labelled USB and has a different pin missing. Finally, you then have your pinned connections. I know there's a lot of pins here, and these are for your hard drive indicator LED, power switch, and your power LED. So that's all the lights and buttons on the top of the case. We're going to run through these in terms of installation one by one, and let's start off with HD audio. This goes to the bottom left of the motherboard. This is followed by USB 2.0, which goes to the centre bottom of the motherboard. As I say, generally the ports are in these locations, but they can change on rare occasion. USB 3 is next up, and it's the largest of all our front panel connections and is notched, so it only goes in one way round. I'm not talking vertical and horizontal, I'm talking vertical and vertical, so just be careful and watch out for this step. Finally then, your pin connections are last up, and they go to the bottom right of the motherboard. And once we've done this, we can see if we've got them right and whether our system turns on for the very first time. Lovely stuff. And I think on that note, we're pretty much done with the build. It's time to find out whether it turns on for the first time, whether all the fans spin, the RGB glows, and This is the exciting bit of any build, and anyone who's watching who's built their own PC will know this. And if you haven't, you're missing out. So here we go, let's give this a go, power button. Oh, it works, that's straight away. That was like literally straight off the bat, and we can of course cycle through all of our different RGB modes as well on the case. The Ballistics gaming memory looks awesome as well with that RGB. Nice one, Crucial. But that pretty much wraps it up for my unboxing, first look and build in Neutron Lab's Stellar PC case. If you enjoyed this video, a like rating would be fantastic, and make sure to get subscribed to the Ebuyer YouTube channel if you'd like to see more from me, guest host Geekawatt, or from any of Team Ebuyer. Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you soon.